Welcome to Snakes and Otters, a pointless discussion of eternal questions. Get ready, we're about to live in your head rent-free. Hello, Otterites. This is episode 191.
I am Martin.
And I'm Robert.
And I'm Francis.
All right, gentlemen, it is Hoopajube!
Hoopajube, hooray!
Hoopajube week. Now, we just did one of these a couple months ago. So it seems a little quick to have another one, but 2 Hoopajubes in a row, we are returning to writing.
Okay.
All of us are deeply involved in the act and the craft of writing. And it's something that the more we do, personally anyways, the more that I work on it, the more I come to appreciate the masters. And for me, one of those masters is the guy that I'm going to talk about. Mm-hmm. And the reason I say this is because as you start to write yourself, and if all of us are the same way. If we're going to do something, we want to do it well.
Yes.
So it means we're going to learn good ways to write and bad ways, and when to avoid them, and what the rules are, and when you should break them and when you shouldn't. Mm-hmm. And because of this,
and we each like to learn our own way.
And we each learn our own way, most definitely.
I mean, that is one of those things where it's like, you can't teach me, I got to learn.
Well, as Kirk said, we learn by doing. Ultimately. That is the only way to truly learn. And one of the things that this whole endeavor has done for me is that it's practically ruined casual reading for me.
There's truth to that, yes.
Because a lot of the casual reading that I do is, indie authors that I can get a download from Kindle Unlimited, so I don't have to pay for it, because I pay one price a month, and I can read unlimited books that are on Kindle Unlimited. It's not all books on Kindle, but just these certain ones. And, being independent authors, I do like to support them. Yeah. I think that's a great thing. But I'm also discovering, and I can see where these guys are like, you really shouldn't do it this way. I would have written it differently. But what's worse is going back and reading authors published by a real traditional publishing house, and seeing things like, dude, who's your editor?
Yeah. Uh-huh.
I mean, not just for consistency's sake, but for writing.
Yeah.
So many rules are broken. Head hopping, info dumps, things that almost every teacher of writing will tell you don't do. And so it's just interesting. So that's why I when I go back to one of the classics, the guys that really write well, I enjoy them more now.
I'm not so certain that writing itself hasn't come a long way, baby, since the digital age, since we can now work off word processors and things like that with computers. I think so much since when it was all done before, it was either typewriter or longhand. You didn't mess with much of that because it's just too onerous. So
but that's not entirely true, because look at the books that were written in the 19th century.
Yeah,
they're full of info dumps and on the nose writing, which is that basically detailing every movement and action and what have you.
Well, absolutely. That's another piece to this is that has all changed.
Yes,
and
expectations of the readers have changed.
That's correct, and blame Hemingway for a lot of that, because he when he began his clipped prose and his minimalist writings, and he's probably the biggest one of those, but everybody started writing differently after him. And
yes, there's a great story about his minimalist writing.
Yeah.
Somebody once said, it's impossible to do a story in 6 words. Mm-hmm. So Hemingway sent back, baby carriage for sale, never used. Mm-hmm. That's a story.
That's a story.
That's a story.
Right, exactly. So
yes, but part of that style, even though it's 50 years removed from it, that short scenes, quick reads, that's partially because of the internet and the phones we carry.
Yeah, that's right.
And everything else.
It took that and made it permanent.
Yes, exactly.
Yeah, because we won't. I don't think we'll ever switch away from that.
Television
has a lot to.
The quick
42 minute story.
Yeah.
Or 21 if you're watching a half-hour show.
That's right.
Yeah.
So
cemented Hemingway's legacy.
Right.
In our mind.
Yes, inadvertently, but yes, very much so. But even so, most writers who are writing short or being able to publish whatever they want because they can now. Which
Right.
I am perfectly willing to take all of the crap for that kind of freedom. I think that is a fantastic thing. More people should publish because they can, because it opens the floodgates to finding those who are good at it, that maybe can't get a traditional book deal because of the type of stuff they write,
True. Yeah.
or because it's just bad timing for what they want to write.
Pushes down the barriers. Yes,
Exactly, and I think that's a fantastic thing. Although I'm not going to talk about any of those as far as my
the gatekeepers.
Getting past the gatekeepers is hard, especially with fewer number of publishers nowadays.
Yes, it lets you get around the gatekeepers.
Yeah. So, anyways, we're going to talk about basically contemporary authors, which we kind of defined as people who are writing within our adulthood, give or take a little.
Give or take. And fiction. Again,
And fiction.
We're
And
focusing
fiction.
on fiction here. We have a lot of nonfiction writers we appreciate.
Yes, but I honestly think I like the fiction aspect of it because that's where the worlds are created, and that's what I love.
And that's what most people prefer to read.
Exactly.
And that's where the fiction market dwarfs the nonfictions multiple times. That's just what people want.
Yeah, I mean, I wish people would grab nonfiction a little more because truth is stranger than fiction many times.
It is.
I mean, there's stuff in history that's crazier than any Stephen King novel.
Yeah.
Well, yeah. I mean, that when my first book was based on that idea that those 3 days in Moscow in 1991, a heck of a lot of things happened that most of us don't realize. Holy crap!
Well,
if it had just gone differently, or
Yeah.
could it have gone differently, things would have been very different. It's changed the world in 3 days.
Well, just take some of the big historical events. Take a look at Hitler and the Holocaust. If that had never happened and somebody wrote that as a story, they probably couldn't publish it. It's like, that is too outlandish.
Yeah.
Yeah.
When you think about it, we would never publish that. That's crazy.
No way that some corporal would take over and
Exterminate 13 million people.
Kill 11 million people and all this. It's like he's just some corporal from Austria. Come on.
Yeah, it's. But on the other hand, like you said, truth or stranger in fiction, because fiction has to make sense. So, anyways, well, it's true.
Yeah, our real world doesn't always have to make sense.
Exactly. So, the episode's titled Stephen King and Contemporary Authors. So, King obviously is the guy that I'm going to. He is probably the most consistent author I have ever read. I've read nearly all of his books and short stories. There's a few that just haven't gotten around to yet.
He's so damn prolific, too.
But you know what? There are a lot of people who have written a lot more books than he has.
I suppose.
Seriously.
No, I don't doubt you. I don't doubt you. Nothing comes to mind off the top of my head.
One of the guys that I use as an online mentor with his training is Jerry Jenkins. He's written almost 200 books.
Yeah,
some of those are fiction, and some of those are nonfiction, but most of them are fiction. Now, King he's done under 100. He's done like 70 books or something like that. I'd have to Google it to see. But he generally, I'm pretty sure he's not broken 70 or 80 at most, which is a lot, don't get me wrong, because that's more than a book a year. Mm-hmm. So...
Yeah.
Anyways, but the reason that I picked King, and I've talked about this before, I know, is because I've read just about everything he's written. And as he's written it. So my adulthood coincides with almost all of his career.
Just publishing career, yes.
So, I don't remember the first... I do remember. The first book I read of his was Salem's Lot, which is, I think, his second or third, maybe?
I think it's Carrie was first.
Yes, Carrie was first.
And I think Salem Lot was third. I thought there was one in before that, but don't quote me on that.
If there's one before that, I'm not sure what it is. Because I'm pretty sure Dead Zone is after Salem's Lot.
It is,
And The Shining, I think, is after Salem's Lot as well. Now, that might be colored by the order the movies were done in. I don't know. But because pretty much every one of his books has been done.
Salem's Lot was published 74, 75?
I don't remember. It's in the 70s. So that's why I think it might be
it was
second.
adapted fairly quickly into that NBC TV miniseries.
Yes, David Soul.
Right, absolutely.
Yes.
He was in that 78, 79, maybe.
Yeah, something like that.
Don't quote me on that one.
And that might be the reason I picked up the book, to be perfectly honest.
Right.
So anyway, so from the late 70s on, I've been reading. So that's only like 5 or 6 years into his novel publishing career. So I've read nearly. As a matter of fact, I have yet to pick up Carrie and read it. For whatever reason, I just have not gotten around to it.
Wow, his very first.
His very first, yes. So the reason that I love reading his books is because, one, he's so creative, but two, I have watched his evolution as an author and how he has gotten better at the craft of writing. And that's amazing. And that's, if you're a reader, a heavy reader, and you see that somebody can be successful long enough for them to grow at it, and you can see that, that's a joy. That really is, because it makes you appreciate where he is. Like if you pick up a book now that he's written, and you were then to go back and pick up Salem's Lot or Carrie or one of the other very early ones, you'll think, oh my God, how can these be the same authors? It's like, well, I see that they're the same authors because I've seen all the stuff in between. And he's done just about every genre that you can do. Mm-hmm. He's not just done horror. He's done fantasy. He's done science fiction. Usually, although the fantasy didn't really have a horror slant so much, but most of them have some aspect of that supernatural or that monster kind of thing.
And I know on writing he talks a little bit about that. He discovered, he's good at it. Mm-hmm. It comes naturally to him, which has a lot to do with it. And the damn thing sells.
Yes. And it's like Frank Herbert, why do you keep writing all those Dune books? Because they keep paying me.
That's exactly right. It's exactly. He knows he's always, of course, by now, he's Stephen King. He can do what he wants and has. He's drifted off into a couple of others. He's done some noir crime books in recent days and some police procedurals and just whatever he wants to do. He can do it. And he's guaranteed to sell just because it's got his name on it. And some of it has been pretty good. I mean, I don't know that he's ever had anything that's bad.
Well,
movies is another question.
Yeah, movies is a totally other thing. Yeah,
because most of those are bad, from what I understand.
There have been a few very good ones. But there have also been some real stinkers. But I'd say just about everything he's written has been very good. I've always cared for the story as much. There's been a few times where he's inserted his political views, which I'm not a real fan of because you're automatically alienating part of your readership.
Yeah, right. It's a polarized world. They should know that.
So, but sometimes, they can't help it. And it's one thing to say, oh, I can see where he's coming from because he has a particular political view, as opposed to directly injecting the politics. I don't care if I can see where you're coming from politically or philosophically. That's fine. Mm-hmm. I just don't want to be preached at in my entertainment.
That's right.
If you're subtle about it and you're making a point that makes me think, then yes, that's much better.
That's different. Well, yeah, it's the in-your-face part that nobody
it's the
wants.
You're wrong and I'm right, and you should change because of this, or whatever. That's kind of stuff I don't really care for, and he rarely gets into that. But you do see it on occasion. Probably with all authors, you're going to see that. And most authors, you're going to see what worldview dominates their books, whether it's theirs or not. Although usually it's going to be. But for the most part, his worldview is just, the world is scary and spectacular. And I'm going to show you all of that in one way or another.
And so, that's a neat way to describe King's stuff. The world is scary and spectacular.
Yeah.
Cool.
Well, he has a quote talking about ghosts are real and monsters are real, and they live inside us.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's right. Well, yeah, the best stories, and you find, if you the best monster stories are when humans are the monsters, because we're so capable of that. It's a short walk for us to.
In a way, that's almost a cheat.
It is. But Twilight is almost famous for that sort of stuff. Yeah. They would do the reverses.
But where it works well when he does his monsters is that you can see the evil that man has done in the monsters that he does. Assuming that the monster has a personification. Not all of them do. Like Thinner. It's not an novel he wrote as Richard Bachman. Because he wrote a series of novels under a different name to see if they would sell. They did, not nearly as well as when they were under his own name, but they did sell.
Right.
Which is, he was looking for validation of that. are my books selling because I'm Stephen King, or are they selling because I'm a good writer? So, but Thinner is a great example of the evil isn't really a monster as so much as it is a curse is put upon this guy. And every time he eats, he's a big, heavy guy. He gets thinner every time he eats instead of gaining weight.
Right.
And it's the curse is put on this pie that he eats, if I remember right. And it's just really interesting to see that struggle with all that. And obviously the bad guy is this witch who put the curse on the pie, but that's not the focus of it. Really, he was the bad guy as well as the protagonist.
Because he meets his end in some fashion.
Because of his own hubris.
Well, yeah, absolutely. There's actually I don't know if I don't want to say he stole it, but there's actually a Celtic legend called with Finn McCool that about Hanratty's hunger that's very similar to that, where a curse is based on he eats himself to death to the point where he eventually eats himself because he's eaten everything else he can get his hands on. So it's a similar type of anti-gluttony message, I suppose, is what it is. Cautionary tale, perhaps. But King is famous for doing that. There'll always be a moral, even though it's not explicitly stated. There'll always be a caution. There'll always be something in his stuff.
Well, and the thing I like is that goes hand in hand with that is that almost every one of his protagonists, all of them, I would say, I couldn't say for sure every single one, but pretty much there's always a flawed protagonist. Which either have a blind spot or a vice or something that is part of what causes them problems.
Which has ultimately become the standard explanation of how do you create a good protagonist.
Yes.
That's what they'll tell you. It needs to be that.
Yes. If your protagonist is perfect, nobody wants to read them.
Well, that's exactly right. Or if they're completely unlikable, then they're, nobody wants to read them. Ultimately, it's got to be that perfect mixture.
At the very least, your protagonist, even if they have the perfect life, whatever trouble you plop them in, they have to have no way to know how to get past it initially.
Yeah. Because of themselves, yeah.
Right, either because of their hubris or themselves, or just because it's so far outside their norm that they're at a loss.
Right.
Because if they have a perfect life and know how to deal with everything, there's no story there.
Right. Yeah, conflict is the essential gasoline that drives the story.
Yes. And the thing I like about that I read about, or heard him say in one of his interviews or talks, is that a lot of his books just start out with, "What if this happened?"
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and I've heard that from a lot of folks that they'll say that that's how you create a novel or a story. It's what if this were this or were this, and you take that and run with it. And sometimes you depend on how it's conceived. You may end up in a place you didn't even expect, or you may not. I mean, King is pretty good about fleshing things out before he gets them on paper.
Yeah, he's a pantser.
Yeah,
but
most of his pantsing is in his head. Am I right?
Pretty much.
He
may think it through, have a general idea of, this is what will happen if I do the what if. But as with anybody who's done any kind of writing will tell you, just because you think that's what's going to happen when you start writing doesn't mean that's what happens in the end.
Yeah.
He likes to be surprised by the ending just like we are, the readers.
And sometimes if you develop your characters well enough, they'll tell you where to go.
Exactly, and he's very good at the character development.
Yeah,
yes.
Because if you can do that, then you'll figure out, maybe it shouldn't be that; it should be this, which is maybe 5 points or 20 points different from what you originally envisioned. That's just a process.
Yes,
and it's the magic, actually.
Yes, and I just want to say one other, because we could talk for hours on just the quality of his writing, but one of the things I want to point out about why one of the other reasons I like him so much is something that Jerry Jenkins talks about. Jenkins talks about, in your writing, engaging the theater of your reader's mind.
Right.
In other words, your readers have to be able to engage their own imagination during the reading. If you tell them everything, they'll be bored. So if you describe every action, if you describe what somebody looks like exactly, from the color of their hair to the texture, down to the type of shoes they're wearing, you have taken all the magic out of the reading for the reader.
You want the reader to be able to, in general, not specifically always, but in general, picture themselves as the character.
There is a great deal of truth to that. They
Sometimes,
have to be able to see it
but not
relatable.
always. They have to be able to see that person.
It has to be somebody that
Real and relatable.
Yeah, relatable. That it's like I can imagine this person in my experience.
Exactly.
Well, that's true. That's exactly.
And that's something
exactly
I've worked or tried to keep in mind doing mine. Again, I'm a total amateur pantser and 28,000 word putts so far with mine, but that's been top of mind as I go through is the character. I need them to be somebody you can picture.
Yeah,
so I've left out a lot of,
yeah.
You know, I've been very general with descriptions because what this person looks like isn't important. What they're doing is. So I want you to be able to picture that person as someone you have seen.
Well, and the key to that, and I think King is really good, and because I don't have any of his books right in front of me to show you this, but you know, the best way to engage the reader's imagination, which King is so good at in general, is just in how you describe somebody doing something.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
It's partially how the dialogue happens, but you know, if somebody's cold, you don't say, you know, the sub-zero wind whipped through them and the person felt chilled to their bones. You know, you talk more about, you know, they tightened up their coat and shoved their hands in their pocket and leaned forward against the wind. That gives you a much better...
Right. When you talk about a character driving a car with an arm cocked out the window, that gives you a picture of the type of person that that character is way more than a physical description is going to.
Exactly.
Right. Yeah, you just want just enough to differentiate them and give them some... I've always found one physical characteristic. Maybe it's what they're wearing. Color of the hair is actually pretty good because that it
depends on the needs.
Yeah, it's...
Yeah, I mean, you need... I gave one of my characters a description basically of just the short beard. You know, because you get that gives you a picture and translates...
That's right.
What that personality is probably going to be like.
Well, and for your genre, you have the... not the luck, but the luxury, shall we say, because you're doing a police procedural kind of a thing, you can talk, because they are police officers doing certain kinds of work, we're going to have ideas of what that is in our heads.
What that looks like, yes.
You don't have to overlay that point. Yeah,
exactly. 60 years of TV of, you know.
Right. You know, we're going to picture this guy's Barney Miller.
Well, 20 plus years of Dick Wolf shows, you know what a cop looks like.
Exactly. And, you know, for the most part, we know what a sheriff in a small town is going to look like. And, you know, we don't have to describe the layout of every single room unless it's germane to the story. These are the kind of things I love about... Now, King can go on, don't get me wrong.
Yeah.
Because he's so successful that he doesn't get edited like he used to. Same thing with J.K. Rowling.
Yeah.
First book of Harry Potter, it's an inch thick. Final book is like 4 inches thick. Mm. And partially that's because there's a lot of stuff going on. It's a bigger story by the time you get there. But it's also, you know, when you get to be a certain point of successful, they don't care, you know.
Yeah.
It costs nearly as much to print the 4-inch book as it does the 1-inch book.
Well, especially when you know they're going to sell every one that you print.
Exactly.
You know, it's a guaranteed sale. They don't mind.
Yeah, and they can charge more too.
That's exactly right. Yeah, so there's the business side of that.
There is. So I like King for the breadth of his stories, the humanity he gives his characters, and just it's kind of like I like the post-apocalyptic novels. Mm-hmm. So I like to see how real people. Not the guy who just got out of the Marines, who's been a prepper, and he's got, you know, 400 pistols and 200 long guns sitting in his basement with all kinds of ammo and food. That's not realistic. And sure, it helps the story in some ways because, you know, because let's face it, in a post-apocalyptic situation, most people are going to get shot and killed pretty quickly, or enslaved by some local warlord or whatever. But the author who takes real people and puts them in danger and figures out how to get them out of danger, that's a story. To me, that's a great story.
Very good, yeah.
So, anyways, I've talked enough.
Francis, let's turn this over to you, man.
Oh,
give me some of your people that you like to read.
Favorites favorite stuff that I've been reading lately. Well, I've got plenty of them. If we're talking fiction, the one I've been reading the most lately is Daniel Silva. He is
Yes, you
the
mentioned
author
him.
of the Gabriel Allon series. He's an Israeli former assassin, although not so much former at times. He's their go-to guy, and it's the same espionage thriller genre that I'm writing in, which
Yes.
is one of the reasons that I like him. And I would, if you asked me for a comps, which that's part of the process of writing, my books are similar to his. Now, his is more smaller in scope of characters than, say, the Brad Thors or the Vince Flynn's, because those are usually the enormous. We're on the verge of nuclear war, or the terrorists are going to nuke a city. It's the high concept type stuff. This is
high stakes.
High stakes, exactly. That's a better word.
They should all have high stakes, but high stakes for a larger number of people.
Right, yes, something a little bit more overt like that. Whereas Silva's works, and mine as well, are far more personal. It's more about the character, especially over time, that are going through this. And I think I think that is a better. Nothing wrong with what they're doing. They sell gazillions. Don't get me wrong, but to me, I think a reader really gets into. I love these characters so much, what they're going through, and the fact that they can't get past this, or this in their background is so over. It so permeates them that it's part of their struggle. And when you get their struggles along with their internal struggles along with their external struggles to save the world or whatever, how you come, whatever the scope of the stakes are, Silva does that extremely well.
Well, modern authors, and by modern I mean ones who have started writing well past when we started reading.
Yeah, Silva's first book was 2004, I think.
Right.
Yeah.
So you talk about authors in the last 20 to 25 years, half of our lives, or adult lives anyways, are from a time when TV and other media has shown us that, man, I really want to see what happens next to this character.
That's it. That's
and
right.
TV has allowed us, especially now with the proliferation of all the streaming services. Streaming services don't do movies very often, not as often as they do series.
Right. We want that longer form.
We want that longer form, and sometimes, some of the longer form ones I've seen, it's like, what's the point of all these extra? You could have done this in half the time. But I understand why they do it. It fleshes it out, make more money, whatever. Whereas King was writing even though there were series around, they were not the norm.
That's correct. Yeah.
And I think series now, that's the goal.
I would say you're exactly right. Now, there were plenty of series back in those days, but they were low-end stuff.
Yeah, exactly. They were the pulps.
They were the pulps, exactly. They were the successors of the pulps, which essentially, from the really, you could, if you want to talk the novels, you're talking 40s and 50s with the Genesis that runs all the way really through till about 1990.
Very genre specific.
Very genre specific. They were.
Well, and most series still are, but
right. But most of those were the cheap, $2, $2.50 paperback.
Boy,
series.
are we showing our age there?
That's right. Yeah, that's what you could get. I mean, of course, they were $1 in 68, 69.
Right.
But grocery stores and drugstores had walls of them.
Yes.
And so that was.
That's why when you go to Walmart and Kroger's, they still have books there. It's a holdover.
That's right, because that was a thing that was done during that time, and you had whole companies that were churning these low cost, not want to say poorly written, but many of them, but they sold, and if it sold, they print more of them. Those series would be popular, and if they didn't, you'd retire and go on to something else. And a lot of them were ghost written, and sci-fi was big in the 70s. It kind of came of its own. It was crime and then spies and all that sort of stuff. But by the time the 90s come along, they don't want that cheap stuff anymore. Readers are a little bit smarter than that, and that's why you get more sophisticated paperback series that come along that take a year to write and that come out maybe once a year. That's where we've come to now. Another really good one that you probably know about, which is very, very different in genre, is Patrick O'Brien's Master and Commander series. He started that in the 70s, but
it was also started out as kind of a niche.
Very niche.
Yeah.
But became a phenomenon because by the time he gets about 8 or 10 books into it, people are realizing, wow, this is good stuff. Mm-hmm. Because you've reached a certain level with the characters because they're continuing characters.
Right.
That it's not just about the sea action and all that's going on. It's about those characters put within that universe. And I think that's where the modern fiction series has come from. It's take these characters and have them run through different things, but cumulatively, they grow as the series grows.
Exactly. It's like taking, to use one of your collected works as an example, taking a Nick Carter series.
Yeah.
And making him a real person. Mm-hmm. Instead of this archetype, cookie cutter, two-dimensional.
Right. That changes depending on who's writing it. Because that series was ghost written. Matt Bolan's another one.
Yes, Matt Bolan. That was the other one.
Now, the original first 38 Bolans were written by one man, the creator, Don Pendleton. And when you read those, you can see a definite progression. Because he's the keeper of the character, and he makes it all... But you run out of steam eventually to the point where you can't continue this type of high action and still keep surviving. So they retooled it. But after they did that, you could put them out once a month, which was, they always sold, but there's no consistency.
Right.
Yeah. I mean, some of them were excellent stories. Many of them were meh by that time.
Well, and, when we get to the point where
they sold.
TV and there's so many different forms of mass media, it's harder to do that sort of a thing at a traditional publishing house.
And that's right, and that's why those niche publishers would do that. But they eventually went away,
right?
Because
and
people they want something more than that. Yeah. I do believe that.
Now there are still a lot of niche independent publishers out there, real publishers,
sure.
Not ones who charge you to print.
Yeah, the vanity publishers, yeah.
But real publishers that are small, you're probably not going to make a whole lot of money as a writer starting out there, but at least you get your book published. And they will do a lot of niche stuff in that sense. But even so, those are rarely that dime store novel kind of a thing.
No, they're not.
And so...
Whereas hit and get out and do another one later.
Where you see that now is what I was talking about earlier on that, Kindle Unlimited.
Right.
Because that's the kind of stuff that I see there. Now, they don't go for dozens and dozens of books. Generally, those are like 5 to 7 or 10 books, and that series is done. And, sometimes it's well-written, sometimes it's not. But it just depends. So there's still a market for that, but it's just in a different place.
Yeah, and some of that is determined on what's hot at the time. That's the same way it was in the 60s, 70s, and 80s. Whatever is hot is what, that's why you got zombie stories everywhere. Yeah. It's getting to the point now where a traditional publisher doesn't do those.
No, the zombie books that I want to write, I will probably publish Kindle Unlimited when I write them and just not even bother sending them out because I just don't see a traditional publisher picking those up.
Yeah, that's just...
And that's fine.
Yeah.
That's fine. But anyways... Anybody else or anything else you want to talk about?
We could talk forever. But
I know. I spent like 20 minutes talking about mine, and so
we want to give Martin an opportunity.
All right. Well, let's take a bourbon break before we get to Martin.
Right. Yes.
So, I have the Wild Turkey.
Yes, I poured the same for me.
Yes.
And, this is the traditional Wild Turkey, the 84 proof?
Yes.
Okay. Yes. And, we've talked about Wild Turkey, although I think we talked about 101.
Yeah. Now, at my place, we had the 101. I have the traditional as well, but I don't think we've even cracked it.
Yeah. Well, we did. We had some prior, because that's why I got some.
Right.
I liked yours, so I got some, and we've had it several times.
Right. Yes. Yeah, but the 101 was around that same time, and we ended up we polished off the 101. It's gone.
Yeah, we went through the Wild Turkey pretty quickly.
It's one of our favorites. There's no doubt.
Yeah. I mean, that and Old Forester. We went from the Wild Turkey to the Old Forester pretty quickly.
Pretty quickly, and discovered that those are two of our go-tos, two of our standards.
And
it's a $20 bottle. Regular Wild Turkey is a $20 bottle.
And this is a really nice taste. It's again, we're gravitating, I find, to similar profiles quite a bit.
Yeah.
And that is, sweetness up front with a burn or a finish that is noticeable in the back. And to me, every one of these today has been like that.
Yeah.
And I like that.
We're not doing high rye mash bill most of the time.
Right. Now, these are not as smooth as like a Basil Hayden or a Woodford, which is fine because they both have their place.
Yeah. Interesting. I don't think we ever tried to compare those. At least I never did in my mind. Because I thought Wild Turkey is one of the smoothest, and it's got a fruity taste, if I recall correctly. Now,
Well, maybe the 101. I don't know if this one is terribly fruity, but
Well,
It's the
you
pear.
should get a little pear and vanilla, is what they described.
Yes, yeah.
And I was, like I said, that was what impressed me initially
Was
with
the
Wild
pear,
Turkey
yes.
is like, oh, wow, I actually taste what they're telling me I'm supposed to taste.
yes.
Because I really do get this pear and vanilla taste, and it's super. I think
I let my
it's
ice melt a little too much because I missed. There's a sweet spot.
Yes, there's a spot where you get the max flavor. And,
Yes, and once the ice is melted, you've gone past that.
and I tried to keep it out there as long as we could because we went spherical ice cubes.
Yes, which are fantastic.
I like the spherical ice cubes. I picked up my little spherical ice cube maker, a little 4-spot maker for $6
Can't go wrong.
at Liquor Barn. I just happened to be walking past, and they had them on one of those we call clip.
Yeah.
Yeah, so it's not even a shelf. It's just hanging off of a shelf on clips. It's like spherical ice maker.
Yes. They're the impulse buy clips, is what I call them.
Yes,
Yeah.
and it was definitely an impulse.
they got
buy.
you. That's right.
Yeah.
Yep.
But at $6, it's like awesome. We'll have spherical. I've been making spherical ice cubes all damn week.
Yeah, you got to start in advance. You can't do this the night before.
No, I only get 4 at a time. So I think I got 4 more in the fridge, and I made 12. So that turned out to be plenty.
Excellent.
Fantastic.
Yeah, good stuff all around. I mean,
All right.
you know, we have had a good day of bourbon today.
Indeed, we have.
Yeah, so we focus on Monk's Road and Wild Turkey, but we also worked in a little Buffalo Trace and a little Evan Williams 1783 small batch.
I love it. So, Martin.
Wait, what was yours? Are you still doing the Monk's Road?
Monk's Road.
He's
I'm
still
Okay,
Monk's
still doing
Road.
Monk's Road. Okay.
Yeah.
You found what you like and you're sticking with it.
That's exactly
And
right,
nothing
yeah.
wrong with that.
Yeah. And again, salute to the Dant family with the Log Still Distillery out in Gethsemane.
Absolutely.
It's a winner, but look into better corks.
Yes, cannot stress that enough.
That's right, because,
Yes.
we
Yes.
never had that
Because
happen.
we are here at Studio M, here, Martin's place.
30th floor, Nakatomi Plaza.
Just down the hall from Ellis, behind the waterfall.
Yep.
That's right.
And if you have any questions about that Dant family, please email us about your cork failure
Yes.
at snakesandotterspodcast@gmail.com.
And we'll be happy to help you figure out a better way to do your corks.
Yeah.
So, because it's great bourbon, needs better corks.
It needs
That's
a better
all.
cork. Yeah.
Yep.
That's it. So Martin, what about you? What's your writing tastes go to right now? What are you reading?
You know,
What are you reading?
and I've kind of put aside fiction a great deal over the years to stick with nonfiction. 'cause
Yes, you are the nonfiction reader of the three of us.
Yeah, I mean,
Yes.
as I said, sometimes the reality is way weirder than anything you could come up with in fiction, especially when you start talking about things like the Crusades
Yeah.
and how bizarro some of that turned out to be. But, of course, currently I've been reading a lot of Jeff Shara. I guess, 5 or 6 of those. And Shara is fairly satisfying, but I also find him sometimes, like you said, like an info dump. Like it doesn't make any sense to just dump a bunch of info on me. Give it to me still with your characters.
It's
That's
hard to do that with
Yes.
historical topics.
Yes.
I have found.
Yeah, because especially in the Civil War, but for the others too, that's expected. They
Yeah.
want to know that.
Contemporary
those
writing-
readers want that in the
Yeah.
backstory.
In contemporary writing, I think it's a lot easier because you're generally writing about things that are going on right now. Your references are much more shorthand.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And usually they're internal
Yes.
to the story exclusively.
Right.
Whereas this is writing out Shara's works or writing on a historical canvas.
Yes.
Right. So, even your first book, set 30 years ago.
Yeah.
You had some info dumps in there, which the average reader is not going to know some of those things, but it ended up just being an info dump for the sake of an info dump, and rightly so. It made your story better by not having that.
That's right. We cut it out. Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
Because
The initial draft versus
in the initial
the final
drafts, yeah.
That's right.
Yeah.
Because as you grew as a writer, you realized it doesn't add anything for the reader, The reader already knows, has a general, even if it's a wrong idea, but has an idea of what's Red Square in Moscow, what that is.
Right.
They don't need to know the exact details of everything for them to enjoy the story. And sometimes that just makes it better.
Exactly, and some of that is as a writer too. And the more I research this, the more I realize a lot of writers do it this way. They'll write long and write all that exposition in there, and then they'll cut it all out because that helps them keep themselves in the story, in the pace, realizing you can't get too far afield from this.
Yep.
And then you just remove it in the editing process.
Yeah. And one of the Sharas that I like that I've read recently was The Frozen Hours, which focuses on the Battle of Chosin Reservoir, Korea. And I thought he did a tremendous job with the characters, especially the generals.
Yeah.
You know, that's kind of the motif of the Shara stuff is you fictionalize some of the generals, but you also fictionalize the guy in the trench.
Right.
And you switch back
the Buster
and forth.
Kilrain, from his...
So, but I thought there was some points in it where I would have been better if he had invented a little dialogue between officers to move through what he needed to describe rather than just a paragraph telling me what happened next.
Yeah,
so I thought that was a little bit of a weakness.
It's a pacing question too.
Yeah.
Sometimes because it takes a lot longer to have a dialogue that explains than it does for a paragraph.
Yeah.
So sometimes
you also have to be careful with the dialogue because a lot of authors that are newer, and I see this sometimes in the self-published stuff on Amazon or Kindle Unlimited, is that they will do things like, well, as you know, we did this, this, and this.
Yeah. Oh, yeah.
It's like nobody talks like that.
That's that you never do. Absolutely never.
And I see. And now, before I started thinking about the process and the craft, I'm like, okay, whatever. But now I see it. It's cringy.
Yeah, it is. It's very amateur to do that because you're info dumping through dialogue, and it's just very clumsy.
And it's a clumsy. Yeah, doing it that way is clumsy.
That's correct. Yeah.
I thought it broke up the flow, and I thought with one or two more sentences of dialogue, you could have done it and moved me to the next piece without this paragraph of the Marines did this, and then but it still wasn't bad.
And then it goes. Sometimes it's not necessary. After all.
I thought he was a little too ambitious with the one he did on the First World War. He tried to have too many things.
Well, because he tried the most enormously complex canvas that he could.
He tried the air war, so he's doing Lafayette Escadrille, Richthofen's Flying Circus, while at the same time also doing an infantry story. And it was just too scattered. Yeah. It's like, this would have been really neat.
He's trying to make it bigger.
Yeah,
he's trying to show the scope.
Do one novel just on the air war and do this back and forth.
Yeah, he was much better with that sort of thing in the Civil War because he didn't have the air war. But there's still facets of the war that were separate.
Well, absolutely. And you can break it down, by battles in cases. In the Civil War,
I just thought his First World War one was just too broad. Again, the characters were outstanding.
Yes, he's very good at the characters.
But this was like, well, this was just too ambitious. Make this 2 books. One with the air war, one with the infantry and the Marines and stuff like that. It was really good. So that's my latest thing is Shara, Jeff Shara stuff. But
he's another one you can see the growth in as an author. He's obviously was not his original calling. I mean, he was running. It was described in one of his about the author, about being in numismatics, which probably means he ran a pawn shop that dealt in coins. But then he took over writing the Civil War stuff after his dad died.
Yeah, and the publisher pursued him to do this because he didn't want to.
Right.
And realized after when they produced Gods and Generals, hey, wait a minute, he's got a talent for this.
He does. I thought Gods and Generals was extremely well written.
Yeah.
My favorite part of that, because as a reader, you just felt like you were in the moment.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Is when Chamberlain's Corps comes up over the hill and he thinks he's discovered a regiment of Lee's army that has just been left behind or something. And then he realizes, my God, that is Lee's army.
Yeah.
That's all that's left.
That's the whole thing.
Yeah.
That wasn't in Gods and Generals. That was
that wasn't Gods and Generals.
It should have been Last Full Measure, because that's the end of the
No,
war.
I'm sorry, you're right. Yeah, Last Full Measure. Sorry,
Right, yeah.
Last Full Measure. Yes,
Right,
sorry.
yes, exactly.
You're right. My mistake.
Oh, that's right, because Gods
Gods
and
and
Generals
Generals is
the first
Fredericksburg.
one.
Yeah, it goes.
Yes.
It's essentially Stonewall Jackson's story.
Yeah, it's prequel
Yeah,
to what his father.
it's
did
right.
with Killer
Gettysburg is
Angels.
kind of like the hinge on which both the other two books
Yes.
rest.
Yes,
and
yeah.
Last Full Measure takes it after that. It's essentially U.S. Grant's story.
Right.
Yes.
So, and the other
Yeah.
one is essentially Stonewall Jackson's. So,
Yeah.
So Shar is one. You mentioned Brad Thor.
Yeah.
I've read a bunch of his stuff, which is very entertaining. Brad Thor's he's kind of one of those. Is like a candy bar. It's entertaining, but doesn't stay with you.
Right.
But I mean, he's doing about one a year, I think.
he is, and
he publishes in the summer,
and he sells well.
super successful.
I lean into a little bit of his way of doing things.
Yeah.
In writing,
Yeah.
because our genres are very similar.
Yeah.
He likes the large scope stories, and I like the smaller scope.
Yeah.
It's more personal.
And of course, I like him as a personality too, because he's not antagonistic to other people in the genre.
Yeah.
From what I've read about him, he's a very gracious guy. Vince Flynn,
right.
who I believe recently passed away, right? And
A few years ago, yeah.
and then kind of, so people, in that genre kind of appreciated him and say nice things. So that's, that genre is cool. And then we've talked a little bit about some older stuff that I always like. Oh, pardon me, guys. I'm a fan of Carl Hyacint's first few books, 2 or 3 books.
I don't know that name.
He was a reporter in Florida.
Mm-hmm.
And during the 80s, began writing some of these kind of semi-comedic, kind of dark comedy Florida crime novels.
Okay.
And at least one's been made into a film, the Demi Moore Striptease.
Oh, okay.
Okay, that's from
Yeah.
a Carl Hyacin book. But
Really?
he's
Okay.
he had like his second book is called Double Whammy, and it's about people cheating in bass tournaments.
Huh.
At one time the bass fishing, the pro bass
Oh,
fishing,
yes. Maverick was big into that.
Still
was
is,
a huge thing. And somebody recently got arrested over filling caught fish with lead weights in a tournament, and so this was he kind of turned it into a murder mystery in the backwoods of Florida, and he likes to do what it's called red herrings, where he'll give elaborate backstories to a character who then just gets killed.
Well, that's
it's pretty
common.
neat.
That genre has got a lot of that. It's very good. And I'll tell you another master of that I meant to mention before. I don't want to hijack you, but I do want to mention John D. McDonald is like the
Yes, that's the
master.
Travis McGee stuff.
Correct.
Very much in that same vein, Carl Hyacin. And of course, Greg McDonald with the Fletch series.
Right. Yeah.
Love Fletch from the 70s.
He owes a little. Both of those guys owe a little bit to McDonald, who was
Yes.
a little bit earlier than that. But it was that edgy beach bum that McGee was, which
Yes.
McDonald wrote many others before that, but that's when he started those. He kind of stuck with it, and it's a murder mystery, but maybe not. It's another mystery, but it's maybe not. It's
amateur detective, so it's
absolutely
it's in that
gives
kind
you-
of Hercule Poirot, Agatha Christie.
but without being
vein.
so tightly defined. It's
Yeah.
a broad
Yeah.
way of working with it.
Fletch
And that-
worked for a newspaper, and Carl Hyacin sometimes does characters that are private investigators.
Yeah,
but he worked for a newspaper. He was a journalist and worked for a newspaper, and then went into novel writing. So, and again, Florida becomes very much a character in the stories. where it's pretty
that sounds a
unique about
whole lot
Florida.
like Michael Connolly, which I didn't get to mention either, with the author of the Bosch series, among
Yes.
many others. And L.A. is essentially a character
Yeah,
in that.
yes.
But it's the same type of story that you're talking about, brought forward into the more modern times,
Yeah.
because it is police procedural, sort of. It's crime solving fiction, sort of, but it's also a bit deeper than that. And of course, Bosch eventually becomes a private eye, and you've got other things that taking that space, in many respects, I think it's like taking film noir, which we talked about, using that noirish thing and moving it forward in time and focusing a little bit differently, but it's still got that angst to it, that flavor to it that's that's different, that people just eat up.
And the Fletch series is very much a document of its time. Those were written in the 70s. So it's kind of a post-counterculture misfit sort of character.
Surprised you didn't mention as an author. Oh shoot, I'm blanking on the name. The guy who wrote the books behind Justified.
Oh, that's Elmore Leonard stuff.
Elmore
right?
Leonard.
Yeah, that's who I was going to go to next.
Oh, okay,
That's your guy that you like the best.
I haven't read Elmore Leonard super extensively, but I have read several. And yes, it's very much that same kind of misfits, cops, bail bondsmen. I mean, like Jackie Brown is based on an Elmore Leonard novel called Rum Punch. The cops are just kind of the peripheral guys who are almost one-dimensional. Yeah. And because you see so little of them. Elmore Leonard's pretty influential for me. And that's kind of where I'm aiming. Yeah. I'm sure I will fall short, but I'm kind of aiming at that.
Keep practicing.
Idea.
Keep practicing.
King is a big fan of Elmore Leonard. I've heard him mention him
and of
times.
McDonald too.
Yes,
he's spoken of both of those guys as like the kings of, no pun intended, of the craft, and they were both well recognized as delivering solid fiction time and time again over years.
And Elmore Leonard varied. He did westerns. He did the cops and robbers type stuff.
Yeah, McDonald did some of those prior to when McGee really took off. He stuck with it, but before that, he was writing all sorts of stuff in the 50s.
Yeah, and Leonard's career goes back that far too.
Yeah,
but he kept writing well into the 80s.
Yeah.
McDonald died, now, somebody else that I need to read and have not that bears on what I want to do is James Ellroy. L.A. Confidential, the film, is based on one of his novels.
Right.
And L.A. Confidential is, to me, that's one of the greatest films of the last 30 years. It's up there to me with like Heat, Michael Mann and Thomas Harris and his stuff. So, and Thomas Harris is another one I've read a few of his that are really, really good. Of course, that's Hannibal Lecter. And Silence of the Lambs and all that is Thomas Harrison. He's awesome too. But I need to read some James Ellroy. And
if you're asking us to continue, what else we still have yet to read? That's a long list.
That's a long list.
I'm going to throw one out that I haven't read if he's published any new since I went through the series, but it's another Connolly, but it's not Michael Connolly. John Connolly. And I found him on Scribd, on their app. A similar thing to Kindle Unlimited. One price for the month, and you read whatever's in their app. And actually, King's stuff ends up there a lot.
Yeah.
Because it's his publisher. And it does most of that. And Connolly's book, the first one started out kind of a crime novel around this ex-cop who was ends up tracking down the serial killer who was the killer of his wife and child. And he's left the force. He's a private detective now because that's basically all he can do. And it was a great story the way it was crafted. Yeah. And so it led me to read the rest of the books. But one of the things I want to point out about all the authors that we're talking about, for the most part, the ones we are currently reading, talking about either the series that we're reading or the one-offs or whatever. Character is king.
Oh yeah, absolutely.
There is a time and a place for the pure procedural, whether it be movies or TV shows or whatever. Although TV shows work better for the pure procedural. My wife loves that stuff. Like, she watched all of Bosch. She loved those.
See, told you.
Now, she watched. She didn't read. She watched.
Yeah, that's right, but it doesn't matter.
Doesn't matter.
It's Titus Welliver is absolutely amazing.
He is.
Absolutely amazing.
He is.
Yeah, very good actor. Yeah.
Then, she watches a lot of the true crime kind of stuff. So if she were to read books more, it's probably the kind of stuff she would read. Mm-hmm. But for the most part, for the stuff that we are more interested in, is the character-driven stuff. The early Mac Bolan and Nick Carter, and all that, that's not character-driven so much. It's event-driven, which is fine. There's a time and a place.
Yeah, it was a formula. They were formula, and some of them were very formulaic.
Yes,
the better ones worked with it well, and some of those authors, those that weren't usually even named, they did turn in some damn good stories.
Yeah. Well,
most of them weren't, but some of them were.
One of Martin's, Jeff Shaar, I love Shaar's books, but they're very formulaic.
Sure, absolutely.
But he's found a formula that he can be creative in.
That's right. Yeah, it doesn't bore you.
Right. And hopping from character to character, he's probably one of the first authors that I read where that was so in your face. Mm-hmm. Because his chapter breaks are character breaks, POV breaks.
Yes.
And, a lot of the books that I've read don't have, prior to really getting into that, and now it's become so popular, so many authors do multiple POV books, which is fine. You shouldn't do too many.
Right.
Some authors prefer, a single POV character. I don't care for that as much, just because I like to see what else is going on.
Yeah, it's limiting a lot.
No, I don't like that. I don't like to talk about things like that because I think you can be creative within any limitation.
You can.
But I just prefer, personally, both to read and to write, to see some of the other stuff going on, because I want to see the stuff that this character is going through, not just through his eyes, but also know what's coming. To a degree.
A lot of young adult fiction is written through one POV character.
Yeah.
It keeps the scope far more narrow to me than is interesting. I think one POV is just by definition the scope is narrow.
Yeah, there's a lot more first person narrative books, and obviously that is always going to be single POV.
Yeah, exactly.
Although I have seen a book
done right. Yeah, sometimes.
Well, I have seen a couple of books by one author. It was a series, and they did first person, but they had multiple first person POVs, so they would jump from one person's point of view, but told in the first person. That's very jarring. I did not like that as a technique.
The traditional way is what George R. Martin has done. He'll have one chapter and it's one POV character. In fact, he even titles them with the name.
Right.
But it's never
first person. It's third person.
That's correct.
That's the way to do it for me.
Exactly. And you can do that. I mean, that's the way my books are written. They're third person perspective, and they'll switch POVs by scene, not necessarily by chapter.
Right. Well, nowadays most scenes and chapters are synonymous.
Yeah, sometimes.
No, I think if you look at most books.
In mine, it doesn't work that way because the scenes are just too brief. I mean, it could, I suppose.
But that's just it. A lot of books are that way now.
Yeah,
the scenes.
My chapters are around 30 chapters. If I wanted to go 90, because I usually got about 3 scenes per book, sure. I mean, lots of folks write that way. I mean, that's just Robert Rendizzi's famous for that. I mean, he wrote several fiction books. Still does write on them. Some of his chapters sometimes are paragraph.
Yeah,
it's just
that's the thing.
It's just a style. Yeah, I mean, he was doing that back in the 80s and 90s.
Yeah,
the tail end of.
I'm kind of doing that with mine. Is just a scene's a scene, and however long it is however long it is.
Well, ultimately that's the building block. King always said it was the paragraph, but I believe the building block of a novel is the scene. It's truly the scene. And you have to know how to start, where to start it, where to end it, and all that. And
I mean, if you want to get really technical, you could go down to the sentence as the building block.
Sure.
So it's whatever you choose. But yes, the scene itself has to be a coherent whole.
Yeah.
And that's what so many authors don't get. They get the prose, they get the paragraphs, they get the sentence, they get the chapters, but they miss the scene, and the scene is where the action happens.
Yeah. So talking about the short. Scenes where they're a paragraph or two in the climax of my first book where the final confrontation is going on. Mm-hmm. I switch POVs multiple times within that final conflict because they're all fighting the same entity.
Sure.
And sometimes they're very short. Like I think the shortest chapter is something like 800 words, which is very, very. It's barely a page.
Well, sure, yeah, it works really well, especially if you want to build that tension.
Well,
or if you got like a battle scene. I mean, a lot of these guys are famous for
it's
that.
The action is what it does.
Well, that's
it
right.
keeps you moving really quickly.
That's correct. I've got
it really gets a sense of danger going because you can stay in the middle of all the action.
You're whirling from person to person.
Well, that's you remember in my first book that's got there's a scene at the farmhouse where it's the bad guy, her, him moving all around, and it's like 7 scenes in one, but a couple of them are just 2 paragraphs, and that it really heightens the speed of what's going on because you're in a crisis and people are shooting at people, and now what's going to happen?
And I tell you what. If you can get to the point where you can write those, because I was really pleased with the way those came out, and I was really not only just pleased but surprised, because writing shorter is harder than writing long. I forget who said it, but somebody said, pardon the long letter that I'm writing, or I've written you whatever. I didn't have time to write a short one.
Twain.
That's what I thought it was. I wasn't sure, but that's true. It's very easy to write long. It's harder to write short because you got to figure out what to leave out.
That's right, and that's ultimately, and some of that's done in editing, of course.
Yes,
but
Stephen King says you write your first draft and immediately you cut 10% minimum.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, and to me it's a minimum, but but I tend to be verbose. My first draft was very long, but lots of reasons for that.
Well, mine was too. I mean, for my first book, my original draft was 124,000 words, which is god awful bloated.
Mine was 150.
Yeah, but my final draft is right at 80. Now I went through it. I didn't get there all at once. It was like several drafts through that where you
rarely went up in your word count between
never
drafts.
did. Yeah, exactly.
No, I think you did.
I would add a few pieces here and there, or expand something here and there. But as a general rule, it never made up for what I had.
No, but you went from 91 back up to 93 and stuff like that. On a couple of occasions, because I saw several of your drafts,
right? And
it
was, and part of that was you realized, I should be doing this.
Yes,
and it's a developmental change that forces the word count change.
Yes,
and that's
sometimes usually it's more of a cutting.
That's correct.
But sometimes
that's the
add
process,
stuff.
And if we were perfect at it, the second book I was able to write. My first draft was 86,000 words. That's pretty damn close to what I wanted. I'm editing it now. It's going to be about 82.
It becomes kind of instinctual.
Exactly. The more you do it, you realize I don't make those same mistakes.
Exactly.
Make different ones.
Right. Unlike sins, you want to make different mistakes in your writings. It was a great story reading Scott Hahn. He was his book about confession and forgiveness, and he was complaining to his wife, telling a story about how he was complaining to his wife about he keeps confessing the same sins over and over in confession. And his wife says, well, Scott, do you want to have new sins to confess? Like, right. Oh, well, no, I guess not.
I guess not.
I guess it's better to stick with these than to add new ones.
That's right.
But writing is different. I find I have learned a lot from your all's discussions and what it's kind of not fair. Like I'm not stumbling through the same way that you guys are.
No, just stumble through different things.
Yeah,
that's right.
So
exactly.
I kind of.
Well,
I'm feeling like mine is already fairly spare anyway. Like it's already pretty lean. So, but I'm sure there'll be some more stuff to cut. But I'm trying to incorporate a couple of ideas too of sort of doing those red herrings and sort of
there's some of that
talking, letting you have a little bit of backstory so that you know why maybe somebody meets the fate they're going to meet.
Yeah.
You'll find that. As much as you're able to do that while you're writing it, it's nothing to compare to what you'll do after you've gotten the first draft because you know where it all goes and you realize, oh crap, I need to lay down more. If I'm going to have the punch at the end I want, there's got to be some more references to that. Or this piece here, I never really used that. Cut that out of there. That's just I didn't go there.
Yeah.
And it's just out of the way. It just messes with things.
And some authors, you see in discussions online, some authors write long and cut. Other authors write short and have to add in the editing process.
There's a few, absolutely. You may find, that's probably the harder one. If you get to the end of the story and you're short,
Yeah, if you're only like 50,000 words, that's too short.
yeah, I mean, you got to hit 80 is what you got to hit. That's what they want for a novel. It should be damn close. You can go. You really can't go under it. You can go 10,000 over. You get to 90.
You can even hit 100, but don't go over 100.
Yeah.
90, I think, is just the sweet spot because it gives them room to cut stuff, and you have because your publisher's probably going to want to cut stuff, make changes.
Well, and
you got to leave room for that.
And you're saying something when you turn to a publisher when you turn in a 110, 100,000. They're saying you didn't edit this bad boy.
Yeah.
If you turn in one that's 85.
Now it depends on your genre.
Genre.
Fantasy tends to allow a longer word count.
Absolutely, yeah, that's exactly. Or science fiction
Yeah,
as well.
you're building out a little bit more of a world.
Yes,
that's exactly.
Because you have to do a little bit more explaining.
Right.
I'm trying to also maybe send the reader down a few rabbit holes where maybe they don't know where this is ending up.
Well, and I think that's good in that type of book because if you come across a book where you know where it's going from the very beginning, what's the point in reading it?
That's exactly right. Yeah. Now, you want to make sure that those rabbit holes aren't something that infuriates them, where it's something like, oh, you mean this really meant nothing? I just wasted my time. You want them to be, this is not the main story, but it might lead to the main story, or there's a connection back to the main story.
It's just like a hint where you go, oh, I bet I know. And then it turns out, nope, that wasn't it after all.
Right. But the journey that you spent going down the rabbit hole went somewhere.
Yeah.
Great example of that.
Nope, that's the wrong place. Gotta come back this way. Oh, nope, that's the wrong place. Gotta come back this way.
Great example.
But you learned something along the way that made the journey later easier.
Great example of that.
Yes, please.
As you may have heard. As far as writing goes, now, it got to be too formulaic, and it was a joke after a while, but House.
Yeah.
They would go down all of these rabbit holes. And, they had the 3 or 4 potential diseases. They would always say, oh, well, it could be this, this, or this. It's like, well, how? If all those diseases are that similar, then they should be a lot, pretty easy to treat because,
Yeah.
But, I mean, it almost got to be kind of a joke with watchers of the show that, they were always going to go through X, Y, and Z before they figured out what it really was.
Well, yeah, and that's the danger in some of that similar genre. A lot of the mystery shows, Elementary is a good example, although it's actually better done than most, where you're going to meet the killer in the early portion of the show. You just don't know that he's the killer yet, or she. It's
like an Agatha Christie in that
That's
sense.
right. Yeah, it's right, and that's what they're kind of playing off of. But by the end, when they finally find out who did it, it's somebody you've already met. It's never somebody that they pull out of the air.
Scooby-Doo.
Well, that's right. Exactly. They're the
Scooby-Doo is you've always met the villain. Always.
That's right. And unfortunately, it gets to the point after a while where, as you meet characters, you realize, well, it's got to be the villain. We know we're going to get to meet the villain. It's got to be this one. The smart ones is when they make it. It's not. But they're bad already, but that's not what we're talking about here. Sometimes, and if you can keep you guessing on that, then it's worth watching. A lot of those shows run out of steam over time. If you have great characters and great actors, like Johnny Lee Miller and Lucy Liu in Elementary, for example, and Aidan Quinn, dang, you keep watching them because they're worth watching. Johnny Lee Miller is just amazing as an actor. So you sit and watch him play this Sherlock Holmes character. And it works. Even if the show is, it ran 7 seasons. That's not bad.
Yeah.
Well, again, you have interesting characters. Even though these characters, even though I've not seen the show, I've always wanted to watch it just because...
Your wife would love it.
I'm sure she would.
Yeah.
It's the kind of show that, looks interesting to me, but just never found the time to invest in all of that. Because then watch it from the beginning.
It's on Hulu now, and we're watching it from the beginning... Because we watch it hit or miss, but we've gone back through it and watching it.
And see, being able to watch it hit or miss, that's one of those things that, in a way, can be the death of a show. Uh-huh. Because you cannot... the shows are bottle episodes.
That's right, by definition. Yep.
So everything for the main characters has to return to the status quo, for the most part. You can have some change, but they still have to be pretty much the same.
They got better with that. Elementary was very good at making sure you never knew exactly how that was going to land, because Sherlock Holmes there is a drug addict, which that's very consistent with what Conan Doyle had written, and he's in recovery. So things around that keep him a little unpredictable, and then you got all these other dynamics, and sometimes they don't land back exactly where they were. Now, eventually they find their way back, but it may be 3 episodes of an arc that, well, maybe this didn't work. I mean, at one point, he's accused of murder at the end of one season. He has to go to London, and he doesn't come back right away. So, there's also...
that's trying to introduce some long-form storytelling.
And when they did that, the series was made the better for it.
Yes.
And they didn't lose the procedural crime of the week.
Yeah.
That's
that's hard to do.
Well,
so that's
they
good.
had good writers. They were able to make it work. That's why they lasted that long.
Sounds very similar to Bones.
Very yes, that's the one I was trying to think
Bones
of.
is another one.
Yes.
That's right. My daughters are still obsessed with that one.
Yeah.
It's the same thing.
That was one that started off really, really good, and unfortunately, I think stayed on too long.
Ran out of steam. Sooner or later, you do.
Which was the one that had Nathan Fillion?
Castle.
Castle. That's
Castle
the one.
was the same way too.
Similar thing.
That's
yes.
right. You've got the
again another one I didn't watch but would have liked.
I've watched a little bit of it.
My middle daughter loves Castle, and my older daughter loves Bones, and for the same type of reason. But you get invested in these characters week to week, and if they grow just a little bit from season to season,
well, that's
you
the
can
thing.
make it work.
It's not the storyline behind
That's
that.
right.
It's you've started with a couple of interesting characters, like even the house. It was the same thing. The plot of each show, the content was the same thing, but you saw changes in the characters.
That's right.
Now, House became more of an ass than he was in the beginning.
If that such thing was possible.
But apparently it was.
Hugh Laurie's an excellent actor.
He is.
Not like
Absolutely.
that in real life.
No,
So,
no.
yeah, he's a very good guy.
It's like in sitcoms. What made the things like Cheers or Frasier? Let's go to Frasier.
Yeah, Frasier's good.
Frasier's even longer. It's a sitcom, so for the most part, the show's not going to have a whole lot of change, right?
Mm-hmm.
But you still saw development in the characters and their relationships.
Mm-hmm.
And those kind of shows, the relationships are what people watch.
Mm-hmm.
That's why they watch.
Well, that's right.
I mean, it's partially the creativity of what goes on around them, but because, the relationship stuff gets boring if that's all it is. That's a soap opera.
True. That you're exactly right with all that.
Yeah, and it's there's sometimes when you can take that stuff and interject a little too much into it.
Yes.
There's you're trying to inject a little too much danger and kind of, I don't want to say fake, but sort of contrived strain in the relationships. It's just like, look, that just wouldn't happen.
Well, that's right. That's where
kinda,
you've got to write this well. You've got to write it well.
So,
and some of your conflicts come from external sources. Some of them come from internal, and they need to be balanced and believable.
And not too contrived.
That's right. Because you can't you cannot break a relationship completely without knowing it's got to be put back together.
Yeah.
And sometimes it was done poorly, and sometimes it was done well.
Yeah.
And there's just kind of, to me, there's just sort of a, no matter how good a show is, it once you hit 3 or 4 seasons, you've kind of hit a peak for me. And so it's really hard to carry anything past that. There's very few for me. Big Bang, I think, carried it past that, but very few other shows really. It just feels like, okay, you've done everything now. You've done everything there is to do with this concept, and just there's nothing left.
Yeah, well, even Big Bang, though, they did everything they could do with the inept nerds living next door to the beautiful actress.
Yeah.
And the show in the middle, and definitely at the end, was very different than the show that started.
Well, they had to let the characters grow and add in additional relationships and bring those into the mix in order to make it work. Otherwise, the number of seasons they had was completely
yeah.
And some say it stayed a little too long anyway.
Yeah, I mean, maybe that's what some shows don't do. Is they're already at this kind of large ensemble, and they don't ever bring anybody else new, other than replace this one with that one. But Big Bang really changed the dynamic because they didn't replace; they added.
Correct.
They made it much bigger scope.
Whereas MASH was able to sustain themselves, ironically, by replacing characters and give you a new, fresh, shot in the arm of something a little different. And by the time the 11 seasons were over, they'd done about everything they needed to do, and that was about right.
Yeah, and I think Bones was one of those that just they did a few character replacements and it just kept going and going and going and going, and it's just like, okay, you've done everything there is to do here. You've done too much.
And yet NCIS is still running at, how many seasons now?
Coming up on 20.
Yeah, coming up on 20.
Yeah.
That's
well,
right.
and oddly enough, they're another one that has done the replace the characters.
Right.
Because some characters, they have outgrown what their characters are doing on the show.
Yeah.
It makes sense for them to go.
Yeah, got to move on.
Yeah. And that's one of the things that in those long-running shows that, on the one hand, you can say, well, they replace them because they've moved on to other things. A lot of times, no, the actors just got tired of it or whatever.
Sure.
It's a fake replacement in that sense. There's no reason other than we need to replace the actor. Or they got a drinking problem on set and we can't just deal with that crap anymore.
But, sometimes that saves shows.
It can.
It can actually make them better. I mean, whereas before you can get into a rut, have an actor leave, bring in somebody else. Sometimes it doesn't work. Depends on the actor, but sometimes it's a great shot. I mean, Larry Linville was fantastic as Frank Burns in MASH, and when he left, I said, well, really? What can we do? They bring in Dave Doggins-Stiers as Charles Evans Winchester. Totally different. And yet he's still this little bit of a foil. He's not a fool. He's not a dunce like Frank Burns was.
Right.
And it really deepened the show.
Yeah.
They were able to do that they just did it right.
Yeah. Well, that took us from novels into television, but it's still writing.
Good stories is good stories is good stories.
That's right. Good stories.
Still
good
writing.
Stories, yeah.
So, where does that leave us, guys?
With lots of stuff to read and watch.
Yeah.
No, you're exactly right on that.
But that's okay. I don't know that I want to die having read everything I want to read. It'd be nice, but on the other hand...
That's very quotable. That's very Mark Twain of you. I want to die leaving some stuff still to be read.
And written, maybe.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Okay.
All right. So...
Anyways. Go ahead.
All right.
Because you usually ask, so...
Okay, well, I didn't want to usurp on the captain over here.
That's all right.
So, Francis, buddy, what is next time?
Well, we're still in our American Revolution phase here, so we're going to go back to that. And we're going to talk a lot. It's hard to put all this into even a few bottles like we're trying to do. We're going to get into the war itself a little bit more, and even that is enormous. We're going to try and come at it from the perspective of something we mentioned in the last episode, audacity. That is one of the great American characteristics as we've identified, and that's the fingerprints of that are in some of those great moments of the American Revolution, and we're going to talk about several of them next time around, so make sure you're here.
Hope you enjoyed another pointless discussion of eternal questions. Remember, new episodes drop every second and fourth Friday at 6 a.m. Eastern.
Spread the word. We're on all the major podcast platforms, and leave us a review. That helps others find us.
We're on Instagram, Twitter, as well as our website, snakesandotters.com.
I'm Martin.
And I'm Robert.
And I'm Francis. Join us next time.